just sort of an update on that, the investigation results were released earlier this week on Monday, October the 3rd. Within the findings stating our investigation has revealed a league in which abuse and misconduct, verbal and emotional abuse and sexual misconduct had become systematic, spanning multiple teams, coaches, and victims. So, within this report, ultimately confirming, I think, some of the things that we have been talking about already over the course of this past year. Within the report, many individual players, both current and former, have made statements, have, issued their own reactions to the full report and findings of the investigation, including Mana Shim, Sinead Farley, and recently Aaron Simon, who came forward as an open and willing participant within these investigations, stating that this had gone on too long and that there were still people in positions of power that needed to be removed. So over the course of those first
calling for action, those statements calling for action, saying it's time for action, accountability, change. Owners who've driven this culture of disrespect have no place in this league, really calling it out explicitly in their statements.
You saw it like immediately after it dropped. So probably within that first, like I was saying, not even 48, like first 24 to 36 hours, you saw everybody sort of, reacting to it in real time, that it wasn't just the public who were, sharing how horrified they were, or sharing, their shock or this dismay in reading some of these things that we're talking about. Many players, like I said, current and former, reacting to this as well. And when you have former players of the league who were part of this investigation, continuing to ensure that their voices are heard, making reactions, making statements. I think if we've learned nothing else over the course of the last year, you got to pick your ears up and listen, quite frankly. So here, like reading some of the reactions and statement from players, it's evident where they sort of feel the kind of next steps need to come from. And that is, where we are sort of 3 days later or so.
And it's not just NWSL players or former NWSL players or players involved in former professional soccer leagues. In the USL Championship League, Louisville Ledgehogs had a game yesterday at home, and the supporters group in Louisville put out tifos displaying Arrest Holly banners. And so this has spread not just throughout the women's soccer world, but it's expanded farther to that because in Louisville, James O'Connor owns both the Louisville USL Club and Racing Louisville. So those supporters speaking out at the USL Championship match yesterday as well.
Yeah, it's just very reflective of like some of the reaction. The landscape of reaction right now is kind of highlighted in very kind of three very specific areas. So you've got supporters in Portland, you've got supporters, of Chicago Red Sox, you've got supporters of Racing Louisville, kind of also giving their reactions as well to this, and specifically those areas, because those teams are mentioned primarily in this report and its findings, and the investigation around them is very it's a very, very difficult read to get through, but it's live in public for anyone who is looking to read the full report and investigations. But not too surprising, right? I think at this point, to sort of see that supporters groups in these specific areas or of these specific teams are wanting accountability, quite frankly, post report dropping. So it's been very moving, and hearing from the players specifically throughout this time has also been incredibly moving. And over the course of this phase where it feels like and looks like people are looking for that next step of accountability or responsibility. There have been, again, number of statements that have been dropped. So you've got players, past and former, both, or excuse me, former and current, both like making these statements, but you've also got clubs making a variety of statements as well. I believe about roughly half of the league's club or so have made some statements. And out of Portland and Chicago specifically, you have multiple statements that have been made. So there were specific statements from ownership out of those franchises. Merritt Paulson, owner of both Portland Timbers and Portland Thorns, released a statement individually in his own, sort of speaking of next steps, saying that he was going to be stepping away from Thorns related matters. You've had one from Arnim Whistler of Chicago Red Stars, saying that he was going to remove himself from the NWSL Board of Governance. And then you had additional statements dropping from both of those franchises just yesterday, on Wednesday, at the time of this recording, on October 5th, with further steps, to let the public know that they were trying to take. So in additional statements out of Wednesday from Portland, saying that Gavin Wilkinson and Mike Gulab have been removed from their positions with Thorns. So you're talking about Gavin Wilkinson, and president of soccer ops, Michael Love, president of business operations of both soccer teams, are apparently no longer with the club at this point. The wording, I think folks are kind of fixated on at the moment. Perhaps it wasn't, I don't believe the words fired or terminated were actually used, but relieved of duties was sort of the phrasing that was used. So folks are, I think, honestly are reacting to that in the best way that they can. I think folks are still sort of looking for more, quite frankly, out of those areas.
I mean, supporters have spoken.
We're seeing protests.
Protests are happening, and the Chicago supporters group putting out statements and putting up fights. Racing Louisville Club releasing a statement saying, we apologize to Erin Simon after they declined to cooperate in the Yates investigation. So they're commending her bravery, Erin Simon's bravery, and apologizing to her. But it's very frustrating to me. That statement from Racing Louisville was incredibly frustrating for me to read, when they say that we commend Erin for her bravery in coming forward as part of the soccer investigation, when the club themselves didn't even participate in the investigation.
100%. And quite frankly, the players reacting to that statement as well. Tyler Griever reporting out of Louisville, speaking with Louisville players, Amina Ekic, Julie Ashe, Taylor Otto, former players, right? And Julie Ashe and Jordan Balcom, so you've got, having interviews with a mix of both, current and former players, and, their reactions to the statement. Quite frankly, the players that once more, leading the way on this, saying, quite frankly, it's not enough, or it doesn't feel like enough to sort of have that type of blanketed statement to just be placed out there. Chicago Red Stars, similarly to Portland Thorns, releasing a second update, a second statement on behalf of their franchise. Wednesday evening, the Chicago Red Stars board of directors released the announcement saying that they voted to remove Arnim Whistler as chairman of the board, essentially to transition him out of his board seat immediately with the Chicago Red Stars, and to codify his removal from any further participation with either the club or board operation. So this comes just a day after Whistler's individual statement saying that he would have removed himself from NWSL Board of Governance operations. So it sort of felt like multiple steps back. Local media in Chicago, we were told in February that a sort of internal step back had already taken place within the club. And primarily chief business officer Becky Lynch was going to be handling day-to-day things, and this was again back in February. So then it was a little bit curious as to how an additional step back was going to differ from the step back that already took place by Whistler. So perhaps they were at the time thinking day-to-day versus governance matters are two different things. Let's make this statement. But here again, it almost wasn't even a full 24 hours. It just sort of felt like 18 hours or so. The Board of Governors taking that additional step. So reaction to the news was just still a little bit, what does it all mean? I reached out for clarity to the Chicago Red Stars communications, and they further clarified that the board of directors wants to help facilitate a sale of Arnhem's shares in a timely process, which is both prudent and, when complete, can lead Red Stars players, coaches, and front office staff to a better future. I also just wanted to get additional clarification around the board of directors, because I will say that there wasn't necessarily like their board of directors that were hiding, but on the Chicago Red Stars website, they're titled very differently. They're listed on the Chicago Red Stars website as the board of managers and advisory board and co-chair. So essentially, yes, that I got confirmation that yes, that is ultimately the board of directors. So it's consisted of 6 folks on the board of directors. 5 of the members of that board are part of the new wave of investorship that came in 2021. And one of the board members is an original co-founder of the Chicago Red Stars, who has been investing in the Chicago Red Stars since 2007 and ultimately helped to found them. So definitely a mix, right? So it's something, it's like phase 1. When this news dropped, it just sort of almost felt like phase 1. And this is where it sort of feels like there's just a constant hitting of the reset button. It's like, here's one step. And then it's like, okay, here's the first step. And then it's like, okay, here's the first step again. So it's almost like, this is all still very new and still very fresh. And I think there's still a lot of reaction to it that's still yet to come. And quite frankly, part of what came out of this report, these investigative findings, is how there wasn't the infrastructure in place for accountability to begin with. So here we are now, still sort of having these conversations of how to have accountability when the infrastructure for accountability never existed. So I think there's
so like these owners, higher up executives that are involved and that knew about misconduct that was happening and helped cover it up, helped facilitate it in some senses. There's no guidelines set in the NWSL, in the league, in these specific clubs to say, hey, if you violate these policies, you are fired, you are immediately removed, your name goes up in a billboard in the city. There's nothing like that. So there's nothing like that written. So these clubs and the league right now are scrambling to figure out what to do. And I think that's why a lot of these statements took a little bit of time to come out, because it wasn't like, okay, your names are in this investigation report, you're immediately fired, because that's not written anywhere. And as owners of some of these clubs, we saw it, Sandra, you and I talked about this. We saw it with Washington Spirit last year and Steve Baldwin and Michelle Kang. You cannot force someone to sell a club because there's nothing written about that. Despite violating policies, you cannot force someone to sell their ownership stake in a club. So I think that's kind of what everyone's looking ahead to now, after these statements have come out and people have been removed from their positions of power in terms of Chicago and Arnim Whistler being removed from as chairman of the Red Stars board, but he's still a part owner and still has a say, or at least some type of hand in the pot at Chicago.
I'm curious if, with the follow-up of that and that the board wants to help facilitate a sale of Whistler's shares, that if it's a bit of a mutual agreement at this point. I think it's important that you bring up the example of the Washington Spirit. We saw year-long interfighting between that ownership group throughout 2021, and it ultimately escalated to the point where there were the NWSL Board of Governance did get involved. There was a hearing in place. Both parties were listened to, and then ultimately a resolution had to take place amongst the Washington Spirit ownership group. And I think this next phase, I think people are looking for, those next areas of accountability. What does that look like, and what does that mean? And our owners who are releasing statements saying how much they love the club and how much they love the team and how devastated they are or filled with sorrow, are they actually going to put not their money, but their feeling and what's left of their heart into action and do what's best for these clubs? Are they going to engage in, is what's coming out of Chicago right now specifically an opportunity for one last collaborative effort? Is Whistler interested in moving forward, in finding, a sale of shares in a timely process that would, essentially help the Chicago Red Stars club moving forward? Does that mean they are invested in ensuring that the Chicago Red Stars stay the Chicago Red Stars? What does all that mean? I think those are the next things that people are going to be looking at and paying attention to. Part of this investorship group that came in was touted so loudly as many people who had ties to the city of Chicago. And what does that mean for this team moving forward? So I think that's something that we'll be keeping an eye on, as these statements that are coming out now sort of have components, we'll just say components of responsibility and accountability attached to them, but they don't have actual conclusions just yet. So we will keep an eye on that moving forward, because as always, the news cycle is endless, but it doesn't end there. There has been reaction from players as well in the build up to this game against the United States women's national team and England.
Yeah, there's media availability, and the media are asking these players about them, whether directly involved, indirectly, or involved, saying, like, asking them about this situation and what their thoughts are on it, how they are affected by it, what their thoughts are, how they're finding joy in these moments, what the vibe is around the team. And these are all great questions by the media to kind of gauge the understanding of what these players are going through, despite being on the national team and perhaps their names not being in the report, but they're all still affected by this, playing in this league for so many years and under these coaches.